Welcome back to this month's edition of Refuel. I am thrilled that we have Howard Abrams, president of Socolis Group, back with us again. We had a segment last month where we talked about the importance of verifying the price that you are being charged for fuel. And Howard's company, the Socolis Group, is the premier assistance provider with that. Is that a good way to describe it, Howard?
We like to think of ourselves as an outsourced fuel department. So we're an extension of our clients, really, handling that function for them if they don't have the resources to do it themselves.
Right. That's awesome. And for so many people, it's so important because, fuel is such a huge part of their business. And sometimes it's the one part of their business that they just don't put enough time and attention to really give it a cleanup. But last month, we talked quite a bit about, how you set it up, right? So you want to have a price benchmark that's visible. You want to make sure in the contract that you spell out what that benchmark is, right? And we would always tell people when I was at Opus, you can't dumb it down enough, right? You can't spell it out enough. And that's so that you know it, and that's so that when you're on vacation, the guy that's going to do this for you understands it. So we've kind of talked through that. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about are how important is it, do you think, for your folks to really understand the market conditions around the country and what's happening with fuel prices?
Well, I think it's really important to have a sense of that because there are times, especially when there's outages, whether it be a pipeline gets hacked and all of a sudden there's shortages in product, or wildfires, hurricanes, whatever it may be. You have to understand that some of these things are really disruptive to the market. And if you're not in tune with that and all of a sudden your prices are going up, you may not even understand why. Sometimes it's things that are a little less visible depending on where you're at. You may have a job where you work in a corporate office, but you have locations all around the country. Certain times we've seen there's a shortage in a very specific market. Maybe there's a refinery outage, and that can be very disruptive to that market. So, talking about negotiating, you may have a negotiated deal, you may be verifying prices, but there are going to be times where with the relationship with your suppliers are going to come to you and say, look, we've got an issue here. This market's really tight. We're not able to get product. We're not going to be able to honor that Opus deal for a day or two until this gets straightened out. So having that awareness is really important to know whether or not what your supplier is telling you is making sense.
That's so true. And, what we've told people over the years, not only people that I trained to work at Opus, but my customers, we would say, look, what you should ask yourself, because fuel is such a huge expense, you should ask yourself every day when you go into the office, what happened in the market yesterday, right? And there are things available in the market for our viewers called tickers, right? You can get what's called a spot ticker. You can get it from a company called Argus Media, has a terrific spot ticker, and it gives you your pricing and it gives you your news, and you can focus in on the news that's important to you. Like, are you on the Colonial Pipeline? Is the Colonial Pipeline prorated? Are you somewhere where somebody's refinery just had an issue? That's going to cause price spikes, and it's important for you to understand that. So back to what I wanted to ask you about, the process, right? So people would always say to me, I want to verify these prices, but I don't have that many people here. Nobody wants to do it. What is the best way for me internally to set up a process to start doing that?
Well, if we use Opus as an example, and we're going to make this a very basic example, but a lot of times for a company that only needs Opus for one market, maybe what they'll do is they'll get the pricing emailed to them each day. I remember when it used to be fax, but I don't think too many people are doing that anymore. But so you get this, it's one sheet of paper generally, and it's going to have all the different suppliers on it, what the calculations are for the average, the low, the high. And what you're going to need to do then is take that piece of paper and compare it to your vendor's invoice. Take that price, put the adder on, and hopefully it agrees to the line item for fuel on the invoice. That's a very unsophisticated way to handle it, but it's manageable if maybe you just have one location, one market. But when you're talking about larger companies where they have multiple locations, maybe they're subscribing to Opus for multiple markets, then you want to take a look at trying to get a little bit more efficient. Uh, One of the ways you might be able to do that is to get the information electronically from Opus, rather than just email, maybe in a comma delimited file, as an example, where you can work with that in Excel. And then maybe what you'd be able to do is build some lookup formulas in Excel, depending on how sophisticated you are with your skills there. Now, what we've done, we have a proprietary system. So we have the Opus prices for all these markets. They actually automatically come into our system every day, and then we're downloading transactions into our system, and all the calculations are done in there. So it's fairly sophisticated. That's probably above and beyond what most companies are going to be able to do. But I would think at a minimum, if you've got a fair amount of information that you're dealing with, you probably want to manage that process in Excel somehow using formulas.
And it's really not that hard. We would show people how to do it. We would show people, look, rather than have somebody sit there and try to keystroke this stuff in, and all of a sudden an 8 becomes 3 or 6 becomes a 9 or, whatever, there are ways you can get files delivered from your price reporting agency, which Opus is. They are a price reporting agency. You can get prices fed into your back-end systems, and you can create your own Excel spreadsheet and help you do it. Yeah, that's very, very important. So if I'm doing it, how often do you think I need to verify prices? How often do I need to do it?
Every day, every invoice. I know that may sound crazy, but that's what we do. That's what we do. A lot of companies out there, they're going to just spot check. So the problem is sometimes errors happen and then they're gone. They're not repetitive. And you might miss it if you're just spot checking. Sometimes an error, though, it could be the type of thing where once you find it, fortunately, if you find it, you're going to correct a lot of errors in the future. It could be something was entered into a system incorrectly, and that will just stay in there. And whenever an invoice gets generated, it'll just keep on going. So it's really important. We feel it's important to check every transaction, every invoice.
I agree with you. I think it is important. Can I ask you, what is the worst mistaken billing situation you?
Wow. Yeah, we've seen some big ones. Some fat finger errors, basically, where you put a couple of extra zeros in. Yeah.
So if that happens, Howard, what's my recourse? What do I do?
Well, what we do is again, we're an extension of our clients. We're an outsourced field department. So if we were on their staff, on their payroll, what we would do is we would contact the vendor and say, hey, look, we found an error here. We want to go through it with you. We want to understand what we're seeing versus what you see. And we're usually pretty confident, but sometimes we'll have something that maybe we pursued, it turned out it was okay, and we understand why after having that conversation. But typically, we're able to go to the vendor and explain, here's what we've got, here's what we expected to see. They'll check their records, and they'll come on back and they'll say, yeah, you're right. And we're going to either credit and rebill the invoice if it hasn't been paid yet, or we'll just send you a refund check. And then we just follow up with the client and make sure that that's fully resolved at that point.
So your suggestion, and I agree with it, is our viewers, people that have the need to verify, you should verify every day. You should verify every day. And if you have issues, you should probably try to get somebody like the Sokolis group that can give you help, right? If you're short on people or whatever. So how does somebody engage with the Sokolis group if they need to do that? Like, what's the best way to do it? I mean, we're going to give them your information at the end of this, but like, what is the process?
Oh, you just call our main line, send us an email. We have a website, and there's a way to submit a request, and then we'll get in touch. What we'll do typically is we'll take a look at how you're currently buying fuel. We'll ask for some samples of the transactions or recent invoices. And this is before we'd even bring you on as a client. We want to make sure that there's an opportunity there for us to add value. Otherwise, it's not going to be a win-win situation. So we'll take a look and we'll see how your pricing looks right now, whether or not we think there's an opportunity to improve it, or whether or not there may be opportunities, say, to do mobile fueling, that mobile on-site fueling that we talked about last month. Maybe do that instead of buying retail.
So one thing that I think people get confused on a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, taxes.
Fuel taxes, they're tough sometimes. Especially when you get into states where there's different taxes by county or certain jurisdictions. It can be really complicated. And then you have situations where sometimes there's tax on tax. So, for instance, sales tax being applied to federal excise tax. So it can be very complicated. And checking the taxes on the invoices is another part of the validation that's really important. Not one of those areas that you see mistakes very often, but we find them. We do find them because taxes change too. They certainly don't change as frequently as fuel prices. That's every day. But a lot of times taxes will change several times throughout the year, usually at the beginning of a quarter. A calendar quarter, taxes may change. And we've had situations where a supplier missed it for whatever reason. There isn't, in my opinion anyway, to stay up to date on taxes, there isn't a great one-stop shop where you can just get all your tax information, especially down to that detailed county or specific jurisdiction level. So it's really a matter of just going out to different sites, state revenue, tax revenue sites, things like that, to try and stay up to date on it.
See, you and I should start a tax publication, right? That's what we should do. You collect all these taxes and you provide it to everybody. I know we struggled with that when I was at Opus, is getting that accurate information, because I think a lot of people have a preconceived idea that these taxes don't change multiple times during the year, but in reality, they do, right? Yeah, and that's what you guys do. So you do go in and you'll like double check and make sure all the taxes are correct, right? Okay. Talk to me a little bit about competitive bids, because you mentioned one of the things you wanted to. You and I were talking before we started the taping. We were talking about getting competitive bids from suppliers. Walk us through that.
Well, and we're talking about bulk fuel for this example. So if you have a tank on site and you want to have loads delivered to that tank, you're going to want to reach out to suppliers that you know are in the area. But there's also national suppliers or large regional suppliers. You should try and find out who they are and just reach out to them. Chances are they've got a website. You could submit a request to get somebody to contact you. Their salespeople will be more than happy to talk with you, gather up the information that they need. And they may even want to come out and do a site visit just so that they can understand, well, where's your tank? Are we going to be able to get our truck in here to be able to get the load delivered? Sometimes there's some complications there that could impact pricing. But you're going to want to reach out to these folks. And, I'd say at least three different folks, maybe even more than that, right? And try and get a sense of what the pricing looks like. It's really important. And even if you've been with somebody for a while, I'm not saying do it every year, but maybe every couple of years, go out there, get competitive bids, let the incumbent bid. Let's see how they compare to whoever else is out there. Make sure that you're still getting the best price.
That's very true. One of the things that I've noticed, I don't know if you noticed this, a lot of times in fuel departments with large buyers, or, even if they're not large, and I said it in our last episode that, sometimes they don't throw as much money at the fuel part of the business, right? And they tend to cycle people through it. So what I've seen is that somebody will be in that job for a while, then they'll move them out, they'll put them in something else, and they bring somebody else in. And there's a thing called, we used to make a joke about it when I was at Opus, the book, right? So like you'd have the book, you'd have the names of the suppliers, the contacts, but don't you agree that the reality is in our business, the fuel business, that those names change very quickly and the suppliers come in and out, right? They're gone.
I think there's more stability, I think, with some of the smaller ones, but when you get to some of the national ones, sometimes it seems like a revolving door. So it's tough sometimes to keep that relationship going, with the person that you've been working with.
One question that was always asked to me a lot, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. So if I'm looking for a new supplier, let's say, and, maybe I'm okay with my current supplier, but I want to just, give my fuel buying program a bit of a makeover and just make sure that I'm doing it the right way. If I want to go, I know I could probably go to a local distributor, right? But if I want to go to a national producer or refiner like a Valero or something like what is the cutoff in terms of volume, do you think? Is there a cutoff, or what do you think?
Well, that cutoff must be pretty large, because honestly, that's not something that we're doing. typically, and we've got clients that are doing quite a bit of volume, but that is not something where, uh, yeah, if I had to venture a guess, I'd have to say you're talking about many millions of gallons per month, maybe over a million at least, maybe 5 million gallons.
That's what I tell people too. It's all about the rateability, right? So you always want to look at your rateability. That kind of tells you how large your negotiating posture is. So if I want to go out for, what is the process? Do I need to put paperwork together when I go out for a bid, or what is that whole?
Well, ideally, what you should be able to provide to multiple potential suppliers would be a summary of your locations. So if you have multiple locations, you want to have, and I'm going to use a spreadsheet as an example of how I would lay this out. It's what we do. So you're going to have a row on the spreadsheet for each one of your locations, and then you'll have the address. You're going to want to put down what kind of tank it is. Is it an above ground tank or is it an underground tank? Because that'll impact whether or not there's going to be a pump fee that might be included in the quote. You're going to want to indicate how many gallons does that tank hold. That's really important because that may indicate whether or not you're going to be able to take full loads or if they're going to be short loads. So, and obviously the product type too. You may also want to indicate whether or not you have a need for DEF at your fuel island. You may want to have the supplier deliver that too and handle that. And there's other things that we've run into that could be important. You may want to indicate to the supplier that you have inventory information with that tank, whether or not you want to have automatic reordering, where you want to have that supplier be able to tie into your system and know when it's time to bring fuel out, as opposed to manually checking the fuel level and calling them and saying, hey, I need a delivery. It's a lot better when it can all be automated there, and you have much less chance of a run out under those scenarios.
What do you suggest for people that they should have those kinds of tank monitoring devices, and you should try to automate as much as you can of the buying process?
Absolutely, yeah. But more importantly, when we're talking about any kind of technology around the tank with a bulk tank, is having something that is measuring how much fuel is coming out of the tank. So basically, like a card lock system, your own card lock system for inventory control. There's some small companies, maybe what they've got is a clipboard and a pen in a waterproof case somewhere near the tank, and people are supposed to write down. I mean, maybe that doesn't happen anymore, but I'm afraid it might. Yeah, yeah, but as far as technology goes, I think it's really important to track what's happening to that fuel. It's even better if you can actually get it set up so that there's inventory monitoring, and it's easy to log onto a website and see in real time what your inventory levels are. You share that with your supplier, they can do that too, and they have ways to automate the delivery when they see that the inventory is reaching a certain level where it's time to top it off again.
Right. It's important for people to, especially if you are in a large metropolitan area, like if you're in Miami, or if you're in Philadelphia or Chicago, the larger metropolitan areas, there are multiple suppliers, right? There's multiple different suppliers at different terminals. So, what we would always tell people is there's good news and there's bad news, right? The bad news is you got to do the homework. You got to figure out who these folks are. You got to reach out to them. You have to kind of do the work. But, the good news is once you do it, you probably don't have to do it again until you go out for the bids. You mentioned something, and I want to talk a little bit about this. You were saying, besides verifying my pricing, am I confirming that the gallons were actually delivered? Talk to me about that. Did I get the right amount of fuel?
Well, and this is for anything that's really being purchased at companies. If you get an invoice for a supplier, you need to have some way to validate that what you're getting billed for you actually received. We do it for ourselves as individual consumers. You want to do that for your business too. So one of the common ways to do that, and again, we're talking about bulk fuel here as an example, they'll leave you a bill of lading. And that, maybe there was a purchase order that went ahead of that. The purchase order can be matched to the bill of lading, and then the bill of lading can be matched to the invoice. And hopefully that three-way match is going to give you comfort that, yeah, you really got that fuel. When it comes to mobile fueling, typically what they're going to do is be able to provide you a receipt of the gallons that were delivered into each one of your vehicles. And a lot of the mobile fuelers out there, they're fairly sophisticated with their systems. They can actually print you a receipt on site and leave it whoever's managing the yard, but chances are they're going to be able to email that to you right after the delivery. And you can go through that and have all that information to again, be pretty comfortable that that fuel really did go into each one of those vehicles.
How many people? So if I have a fuel team with, let's say, if I'm a small shop and I've got, let's say, 2 people and maybe somebody that does it when somebody's on vacation, like, do I split this with different people or do I have one person really doing this verification? What's the best way to do that?
Well, if you can split it, it's always good to do that because you need a backup. People get sick, people want to go on vacation, people may leave for another job. So you have some duplication there in case. Now, maybe one person is typically the one who's going to handle it, but you swap in that other person from time to time and make sure they stay fresh on how to perform those tasks.
Well, that's why we would always say to people, people would constantly ask us whether we thought it was a good idea for them to do these crazy kind of complicated pricing formulas, right? It was either a rack price or a basket of suppliers with a differential and all this other stuff. And we would always say, you got to look at your internal resources, right? You're going to want to go on vacation. You're going to want to go to Cancun. You're going to want to sit on a beach and, get some margaritas or pina coladas. Do you really want to be worrying about whether the person back home is really doing this right? Which is why they go to people like you, right?
Right. They don't have to worry about us getting sick or going on vacation. We typically have a dedicated account manager, but we still have backup. We have other folks who support them, other folks who oversee them, and we're ready. So whatever happens, we're able to cover whatever the client's needs are.
So we only have a couple minutes left, Howard, but I'm curious, what are your final thoughts about all of this? What do you think?
Well, I think it's really important to verify your fuel invoices and make sure that you're getting that correct price every day. Every invoice, keep on checking them because fuel is a big bite out of your budget. You want to make sure that you're paying the right price. And it's a volatile commodity in terms of what the price is on any given day. I mean, some days maybe it doesn't move that much, but it's not uncommon for prices to change a penny or two in really tight times. When there's supply disruptions, it could go up 10, 20, even more cents per gallon. So if you're not watching it and you don't have a sense of what's going on in the market, there's a good chance that you could end up overpaying.
So the moral to the story is not only check your invoices, but also have that information, right? Keep abreast of what's happening in the markets. Because you just made a really good point, and I want to emphasize it. Fuel is not like pencils. It's not like pens. It's not like paper towels or coffee or whatever. It is an extremely volatile commodity, and prices move all the time. And, you and I have been doing this for a long time, right? So you probably remember the days when, if price went up like a penny or 2 cents, it was like the world stopped. Now you look at it and go, penny to, talk to me when it's 20 cents because we've seen days where prices move by 20 cents. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough. And for our viewers out there, we will provide Howard's information at the end of this. I can't say strongly enough how much I respect and like these guys and have referred many folks over to them over the years. You guys are an amazing asset to our industry and have helped many, many people do this right. So I would heartily recommend you guys.
Really appreciate those kind words. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy that you asked me to join. It's fun. So
we'll have you back.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Refuel, and we'll see you next time.